Erev Tov Rabotai. We are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Terumot. We're up to Perek Bet Mishnah Daled. Today's Mishnah should be Le'ilui Nishmat Neria ben Svedlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Bracha Israelov Menuchatam Began Eden. Amen. The Mishnah says, En tormin mimin al sheno mino, v'im taram en terumato teruma. We may not separate teruma from one type of produce for another type, for example, from oil for wine. And if someone did separate teruma from one type of produce for another, his teruma is not valid. And the Mefarshim explain, the Torah says in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 18, pasuk 12, Kol chelev yitzar v'chol chelev tirosh v'dagan. All the best of your oil and all the best of your wine and grain. The word chelev, best, refers to teruma. Since we're going to see in this Mishnah, teruma has to be from the best portion of one's produce. By mentioning the teruma of oil separately from the teruma of wine and grain, the pasuk is teaching that a person cannot designate one type of produce as teruma for another type of produce. Now the Mishnah classifies certain type of produce. Kol min chitim echad. All types of wheat are considered one. The Rav says some varieties of wheat are red and some are white, but they all belong to the same category with respect to teruma. Kol min te'anim ugrogaot udvela echad. And all types of fresh figs, dried figs, and pressed figs are all considered one. The Rav says this includes both dark and light figs. V'torem mizeh al zeh, and one may therefore separate teruma from any one type of wheat for another type of wheat, or from any one type of fig for another type of fig. Now, we know the Torah requires that teruma be separated from the best part of the crop. Like we just said, the pasuk says, Mikol chelbo. But the Tanaim disagree about an application of this halakha. The Mishnah continues, Kol makom sheyesh kohen toreh min hayafeh. Wherever a kohen is available to whom you can give the teruma right away, a person should separate teruma from the best produce he has. For example, if a person has fresh figs and dried figs, he should designate only fresh figs as teruma for both the fresh and the dried figs, since fresh figs are better than dried ones. But wherever a kohen is not available, and therefore you have to keep the teruma for a while before you give it away, a person should separate teruma from the produce that lasts longer, even if it's not the best produce. For example, if a person has fresh figs and dried figs, he should designate only dried figs as teruma for both groups, because dried figs last longer than fresh ones. This opinion holds, this Tanna Kama holds, that in this case, the longer lasting produce is considered the best one, even though it's of lower quality, because teruma that's going to be spoiled by the time the kohen gets it is obviously not considered the best. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, however, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He says, Le'ulam hu toreh min hayafeh. One should always separate teruma from the best produce he has, even if no kohen is available and the other produce will last longer. Because Rabbi Yehuda learns out from a pasuk in the Torah that the higher quality produce is always considered the best, even if it doesn't last as long as the lower quality produce. And the Rav tells us, En halakha Rabbi Yehuda, the halakha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda. That is Rabotai Mishnah Daled. Mishnah Hey cites another case in which the Tanaim of the previous Mishnah have another, their machloket applies. The Mishnah says, Tomin batzal katan shelem v'lo chatzi batzal gadol. If teruma is to be separated from a group of onions in a place where no kohen is available, one should designate a whole small onion as teruma rather than half of a big onion. Although big onions taste better than small ones, since a whole onion will last longer than half an onion, a whole onion should be used as teruma if no kohen is available. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, however, again, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and he says, Lochi, this is not so. Ela chatzi batzan gadol. Rather, one should designate half of a big onion as teruma, since bigger onions are tastier. Now, Rabotai, as a preface, in the time of the Mishnah, it was common for people who lived in cities to eat one type of onion, and for people who lived in villages to eat a different type of onion. Rabbi Yehuda applies his opinion to the case of designating one type of onion as teruma for the other type. The Mishnah says, V'chen haya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, and Rabbi Yehuda would similarly say, Tormin betzalim mibnei hamedina al hakufrim, aval lo min hakufrim al bnei hamedina. One may designate onions of city dwellers as teruma for onions of villagers, but one may not designate onions of villagers as teruma for onions of city dwellers, because onions of city dwellers are the food of nobility, which shows they taste better. Now, although the onions of the villagers last longer, Rabbi Yehuda says that the onions of the city dwellers are considered the superior type because they're tastier. And again, the Mishnah said, therefore, you can designate onions of city dwellers as teruma for onions of villagers, but you cannot designate onions of villagers as teruma for onions of city dwellers. That is in Rabotai today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen v'amen.